in the past couple of years, we launched Routescan at an Epic Web3 event in Seoul, I remember. So thank you guys for helping us launching this. But for the past 2 years, we started talking about us, and everyone talks about themselves. So for this year, we wanted to do something different. We want to talk about the industry. And but first, just a quick word from the sponsor. Who we are. We are the world's first unified multi-chain block explorer. We provide access to more than 130 chains. It's actually more than 150 today because we added 20 in the last week. And we provide a 48 explorer setup with full history APIs, enhancing charts, and powerful dev tools. Basically, Etherscan better, fast, and cheaper. So what is this? We did something that not even A16Z did. Like, we were so much struggling with understanding how many chains there were in the industry, what type of RAS they were using, what type of layers were they, if there were side chains, which chain they were breaking point to and checking point to, and so many other things, like how many block explorers that a chain have, and if it's Block Scout or PingPub or whatever else. And so we basically started doing this like mid last year, and we literally did hundreds of hours assembling, validating, and analyzing the largest data set of multi-chain data. We did this for us in the beginning because we wanted to transform the raw, like we wanted to use this as an internal BI tool, to understand which chains to target next to include in our Explorer and to make them pay us, But then we decided to simply throw it in the public. And that's what we did in January. So this is the state of the market report. We released it first in January, as I said, and we released it as a 60-something page report about the whole blockchain industry, which type of stack they use, which type of providers they use, how many block explorers, and so on. Of course, I cannot tell you everything right now. We will have the report ready in a few days, but you can already, start looking at the 2024 report. And mind me, this is bigger than the A16Z report that only tells you Solana is bigger. Okay, we know that Solana is bigger, but what about the units? What about the long tail? Who is using what? So that's what we did. We analyzed 353 chains in our 2024 report, and that number increased to 38,246 with that 190 chains of change. We tracked 13 ecosystems in 2024 and now tracking more than 20. We're tracking all the rollup types, even with the hybrid ones. We're tracking all the RAS providers that helped us understand what they do and what's their work. Also their hosting type, the VM types, like what is the biggest VM, not in terms of TPS, but in terms of real like developer adoption. What are the block explorer providers and what are the settlement chains? We don't have all the data here, of course, because otherwise I would talk for hours. But I'm now gonna show you what we're trying to show you for this quarter, so for the Q1 of 2025 and the next ones. So the first state of the market report was so successful that a lot of RAS providers and other types of providers were actually asking us, how do you guys have all this data? Well, we simply scrapped all the Web3 things we could. It took us a lot of time. But yeah, so this is the report Q1 2025 preview. So layer distribution. What is the layer distribution? It simply says how many chains we have deduplicated from all the mess. So we deduplicated 936 chains on testnet and 1,037 on mainnet. You say, why there are more chains on testnet, on mainnet than on testnet? You'll see why in a bit, and I can have you some reasoning, some ratio for this. There are 787 chains for the L1s in mainnet, but only 666 for the testnet. What does it tell us? It tells us that actually L1 deployment is actually a bit more, what do you say, easy, because L1 chains are like usually associated with like a silo. They're doing their own thing. Maybe they don't even need a mainnet, or maybe their testnet is private and we can reach it. And most of these mainnet chains that don't have a testnet are probably enterprise chains based off of our Hyperledger. This is just an intuition, but we have more and more of these intuitions as we go through. L2s, as you can see, there are more testnets than mainnets. Why? Because when you buy a RAS provider, a plan from a RAS provider, they tell you, well, you can buy a plan for $50 or $100. And then if you want to reach the mainnet stage, you will have to pay $3,000 or $4,000 or whatever. So you will see that the testnets are actually many more. I think we will find that, of course, this data set is ever increasing. So we will maybe find that the testnets are actually many more than the mainnets, or that the mainnets are actually not that mainnets. Maybe they're just alpha. And the L3s, we can see that there's a growth. L3s were really, really new. Like, I think we saw the first L3 in June 2024. So we have a lot of chains, respective to the others. But we can see that the 2017 to 2022 deployment cycle is still here. There's a lot of L1s. Ethereum is not the only one. Ethereum is just one out of 787. There are a lot of chains that deploy on the L1, like on Ethereum, but they're not all, as we're going to show you. So this is what you describe as a ecosystem attribution. So it takes into account the greater Ethereum, but you cannot really account for it as an ecosystem, because the greater Ethereum is just like L1s and L2s. It's of course settling on Ethereum, but what can you count as a greater Ethereum? Do you also count the EVMs that are like near Ethereum? That is still something that we're trying to discern. But for example, we can see that Cosmos, and that's what I'm saying, like the 2017 to 2022 deployment cycle is still there, because a lot of chains, L1s mostly, are on Cosmos. I'm talking about numbers, not TPS, numbers. 22 and over 22% of L1 chains are on Cosmos. The rest are on Polkadot, Avalanche. Then this one is L1s plus L2s. Then we see the OP stack. Then when we see Saga, Saga is mostly testnets, but it's still relevant. And then we have Arbitrum Orbit. We have this number from Bitcoin that is increasing because we see more L2s and sidechains on top of Bitcoin. And then we see the super chain that is actually 2.66%. But this is a great number because if you know, the super chain is just L2s settling on Ethereum. So this is actually a great number, like 33% of the whole industry. This is not little. Rollups. What are rollups? Like, how developers choose which rollups they have? Well, for the L2s, they haven't chosen yet. There's a lot of optimistic rollups, yes, but there's a lot of optimisms as well. Per the L2B definition, an optimistic rollup is a rollup that settles both its settlement and DA layer onto a L1. While an optimium is one that may settle, will settle, of course, the finality data onto the L1, but may settle the DA data on a multisig or onto another DA layer, like Avail or Metis DA or Eigen DA or whatever. At the same time, a ZK rollup is the same thing as an optimistic rollup, but it's ZK proofed, and it's settling both finality and data availability on L1, while Validium is settling the DA on a multisig or Eigen DA or whatever. So we can see that the optimistic rollups may win, if we can call it that, But it's not like this. There's a lot of choices that are around building an L2 that it's optimistic or a ZK. And for example, there's one thing that I think most of you know, but I'm going to tell you anyway because maybe some may know, and it's that a ZK rollup as a cost to that is proportional to the amount of proofs that they need to make, while an optimistic rollup as a fixed cost per batch that they need to settle on the L1. So actually, for low TPS, an optimistic rollup is actually bad because it's not proportional. They need to pay, if they need to put 20 transactions onto a batch, then if you are one of those transactions, then you pay more if in that same batch there are 200 transactions, because each one needs to pay its own part to pay for the batch. Well, on the ZK rollup, the batch is proved with ZK, and so there's a proportional amount. It's not fixed. So, of course, we know about Vitalik that says that ZK is the end game, and so we see that this optimistic rollup is the most, it's the most linear solution right now because it's simple. It's just simply spin up a sequencer. Bayes is leading the way in this, but the ZK rollup is much more expensive right now until they find a better way to ZK proof. But it's going to be eventually, this is going to be eventually just one, and we all know it, I think. For the L3s, instead, there's a whole other difference. As you can see, Optimium is about 70%. Why? Because most of the L3 chains are games. And they don't need to have sensitive data settled on the L2. They can just post the finality data and that's it. Like we have proof of play, we have Xi that are processing like thousands of TPS, and they're scaling Ethereum, but also other chains. And so yeah, we can see that this number, I believe, is only going to go higher and higher, and the ZK rollups are going to make less and less for an L3. RAS providers. Maybe some of you works for a RAS provider, so we can show the ranking. So the RAS providers for the L2s are Conduit, 36%. Then Gelato, Caldera, Altlayer, Gateway, Academy, and Zeev. What we can see, what we can note from this is that Caldera is a much bigger presence in the testnet phase. So maybe if you're considering choosing a RAS provider, maybe you need to understand that Caldera may have much more cooking than it's showing. And it just, just to see. VMs. This is something, that A16Z simply concluded with Solana, Sui, and Aptos are the best ones. Okay, yes, they have the most TPS, but how many are those? 86.35% are EVM. And this is a really good data. You know why? Because this data was higher in 2024. It was 89% per account. So EVM dominates, but we're tracking a 3% decrease quarter to quarter. We know that WASM and CosmWASM, Solana, Polkadot, Cosmos, no, Solana is RAS, sorry. Solana is in other VMs. Cosmos, Polkadot, they're actually having meaningful adoption, as instead of what everyone tells. And EVM remains prevalent on L2s and L3s, but there are some types of changes for SVM on L2, and there's some stuff that's happening. Block explorers. Okay, now we talk a little bit about us. But not good. Like we're not that good. As a whole, Block Scout is still leading the explorer phase, the explorer race. And of course, we're not tracking the difference between managed explorers and open source explorers. And we know that 90% of explorers from Block Scout are open source. But we don't want to do that. We just want to say, what is the adoption? We also know that 12% of explorers are proprietary. That is the craziest data I've seen. Like, building a block explorer is extremely capital intensive at the beginning, and then you need to maintain it. But a lot of chains choose not to maintain it. And this is really bad for the UX. And that's something that I can really, I'm gonna go and have a similar talk to this in an hour. And I'm gonna say the same thing. Like, guys, if you have a chain, don't build your own explorer. It's not because I need to sell it, but it's because you don't know how to do it. Like, you do your chain, and we do the explorer. And so yeah, that's the basic idea. Like, when you have some features that the developers want to use, you need to develop them. Otherwise, the developers will simply not use the chain anymore. And that's the thing. So yeah, this is the single most useful insight from this chart. And of course, we did some segmented charts on L1s, L2s, and whatever. We see that Block Scout is leading in L1s, but not that much. L3, 4%. L2, 63%, because it's cheaper and also because it's provided with a RAS. Then we have proprietary explorers that are really, really big on L1s, because everyone wants to do their own thing. On L2s, they're not that much, and 5.6% on L3 chains. And this mainly accounts for the ZK Sync provided explorer that it's counted as a proprietary explorer. So, conclusion. Modularity is growing. Okay, we have many L1s, but we don't know how much dead or alive they are. We know that the L2s are growing. There's much more in testnet than in mainnet. The L3s are growing. There were 1 or 2 or 3 in mid-June, and now there are like 30, 40. So there are a lot more. And there are a lot of application-specific chains that provide a lot of high throughput performance. And one other thing that we're observing is that there's a need to integrate all the stuff about consensus and governance onto the infra tools. Yeah, that's it. We will continue to deliver the report every quarter until we get tired or until A16Z decides that they're better than us. But we want to do this for the industry to let people know about all the little things that matter. Because if you know about the TPS, then that's one thing. That's adoption. That's like user adoption. That's not developer adoption. Because you may have a lot of developers just using one chain for their own purposes. And you don't know, or you know about bundle transaction. There may be chains that have very few transactions per day just because they're really bundled, like multiply bundled. So yeah, you can scan this QR code if you want to follow us on Twitter, and we will release the report likely on May 1st.